Hello, here is my final project presentation. My name is Michaela McSpadden, and I am in PD2 for the spring of 2019. I was placed at Heiko Elementary School in a first grade classroom. Overall, Heiko was a wonderful place to observe. This school has students from pre-K through 5th grade with a total of 304 students. They met standard for accountability rating this year. The average teacher's experience at the school is 8.7 years. This is actually the portable building where my first grade classroom was located, so I had to go through the front and walk back to this portable building every day. As for my classroom and students specifically, there was a total of 20 students in this classroom. 17 were boys and 3 were girls. I was shocked at this classroom gender ratio. However, the 3 girls did not seem to mind being in a classroom full of boys. They had just as spunky of an attitude, I guess you could say. As you can see, the classroom is bright and colorful. That was one aspect I liked about the classroom. I like colorful and bright, and I think it helps the students with their learning. You can also see that there was a smartboard and whiteboard located at the front. This was the only one she had in the whole classroom. I was extremely surprised because it's also very small. There is tons of material located all over the walls, learning aids for the students. They also had a little reading area. Personally, the books were not very organized and they were often thrown around. I think it would have been helpful for them to be organized by genre topic or some other way for the students to find what book they were looking for. The desks were oddly shaped. They fit 3 students to every desk. The teacher changed seating weekly, so every week the students sat with a new group of people. Also, back in the back side of the wall, they had a sightward wall. The teacher did not keep up with this well as the year progressed, but I think it was a good tool to use in your classroom to reference for the students as well. There were also 3 desktop computers used for AR testing. There's 1 here and then 2 right here. You can't see well. And then they also had a laptop cart. As for lesson planning in the classroom, my teacher never involved me in lesson planning. I never saw any of the TEKS for the lessons that were taught. She mentioned one time that she thinks this is something that's more focused on in college when you're learning to become a teacher. She said that the principal will ask for these things, but not very often. So I think that was one area that she lacked in being able to help me as a future teacher, showing me how to lesson plan and how she does it. She did say that she gets a lot of her lessons or units or worksheets from Teachers Pay Teachers, and her mentor teacher for first grade share those and split the cost so that they can both have them in their classroom, which I thought was a neat idea. I put worksheets because the students did a lot of worksheets. This is what I mainly observed the students doing during my time in the classroom. As for lesson delivery, she always opened the lesson at the rug. I think that was good for the students because they were accustomed to going to the rug and that's where they're going to begin their lesson for the day. It just creates an organized tool for the students. She never mentioned any content or language objectives. The students' engagement during the lesson delivery varied greatly. Some days the students were very involved and on top of it and focused, and other days they were not at all. She'd have to stop and call on them or tell them to put the pencil down or don't do this. And I had to jump in and help her with this just so that she would hopefully continue with her lesson and not be interrupted. She did a lot of checking for understanding during lesson delivery. So she would start the lesson at the rug. She would have a paper that she was reading off of. We did a lot of phonics instruction, so learning how to code words like digraphs, ending suffixes, prefixes, those types of things. So she would read off of that, and then she would also write words on the board and have the student come up themselves to the whiteboard and code the word for the rest of the class. So here she was checking for their understanding. She'd also call in a variety of students using the popsicle stick, so it was random. It was never the same student. And then she also closed every lesson with a worksheet as well after they left their rug time. As for assessment, I believe assessment refers to the process of making a judgment by the educator to evaluate, measure, and document the academic readiness, learning progress, and educational needs of the student. Since I came at the same time every day and it was during the ELA and reading time, I didn't observe a lot of assessment, so there were never tests administered during my visit specifically besides AR tests and sight word booklets. So the sight word booklets I actually got to assess a few times myself. These are them actually up in the top right hand corner. These booklets were based off of a list of the most common sight words and fluency phrases that students need to know. So these words are words that can't be decoded and the students just need to be able to automatically recognize. Each color is a different level and they have to progress through each of the levels. So there's 1 through 10 on each booklet. And then if they miss one word within the list, they don't get to mark that list off. And the teacher had hoped that they would mark one off every day so they could get through the booklets by the end of the semester. As for AR testing, the students came in every morning and took an AR test as long as they had read their book the night before. Since I was in a first grade classroom, I think the students struggled with being able to read the questions on their own, so they'd have to ask for help very often. And then I also observed several students that I'm sure had not even actually read the book. They just wanted to take an AR test so that they could get a new book, which there's a lot of opposing views towards AR and AR assessment, but I got to observe both the good and the bad. As for classroom management, I believe it's the tools or techniques a teacher implements to keep the students organized, orderly, focused on tasks, and academically productive during classroom instruction. My teacher struggled with classroom management. I could see one day when I came in, she had the Unifix cubes, which are these in the top left-hand picture. She gave each student 1 green one, 1 blue one, and 1 red one. And they kept these in their crayon box, and if they were being bad, she would say, "Go put the blue one on my desk." And then so on until they had lost all their cubes. I think they worked well at the beginning. However, as the year progressed, I think the students cared less about losing a cube. It had no value to them. And then she also tried writing the word recess across the top of a whiteboard. And if the class as a whole was being disruptive or bad, they would lose the ending letter of recess, so the S. And then they would actually lose 5 minutes of their recess time. There was just an extreme load of lack of student cooperation in the classroom. I observed 2 students specifically that never cooperated every day. They weren't doing the worksheet, or they were just staring into space, and the teacher struggled to keep them focused and on task during classroom instruction time. As for my lesson in the classroom, I taught regular past tense verbs. I really loved being able to do this in this experience. I opened the lesson with the kinesthetic style of learning. So I used the rope on the ground and I allowed the students to hop around. It was a little difficult to control them because this is something they weren't used to doing. So they got a little out of hand, but I was able to bring them back, and they really enjoyed getting up and being able to move around because that's something they didn't get to do a lot. And then after that, I just did a brief review of the topic because they had learned it that last Friday. Then I incorporated auditory and visual learners by playing bingo with the call cards because they were able to see it in their hands, and then they had to read the call cards, which I had on the projector on the whiteboard, so they could see these call cards, and I called on them to read the cards themselves. So overall, I think my lesson did very well in this classroom. Important lessons learned from this experience. Classroom management is different every day, every month, and every year. As we learned in our text, it's okay to hit the reset button sometimes. Sometimes some things don't work and sometimes they do. I also learned that every student matters in the classroom. I observed my teacher being discouraged whenever certain students weren't absent that day, and I think these students can tell when the teacher feels that way. So a positive teacher will create positive students, and also an organized classroom will also help with classroom management. What I will utilize in my own classroom. The sight-word booklets, as I mentioned. I also want to utilize centers. I think these are good for differentiating instruction and allowing students to work in different groups. They can work in individual, they can work in groups with other students, and they can also work in a group with a teacher. I also enjoy the classroom seating technique of changing weekly so they can work with different students, and then rug time allows them all to work cooperatively together. What I will not utilize in my classroom is the reliance on worksheets. I want the students to be up and learning and experimenting and just using different ways of learning. I think they get worn out on worksheets. Also, she rewarded them with candy almost every morning I was there. Not something that I want to do. I also don't like the inorganization of the classroom. I'm a very organized and structured person, so my classroom will not be like this. And then not allowing much reading time. The students rarely got a lot of time to read their books during reading time. There was always something else that came up, so I want my students to be able to read more often. Teaching techniques witnessed. The teacher was always open to questions, answered every question a student asked. I really liked this. The teacher also did a wonderful job of incorporating visual and auditory learning in the classroom, but with the bad. Exploiting certain students, as I mentioned previously, calling them out on certain things and just doing this in front of the whole class. Also worksheets, this just creates an environment with little cooperative learning. And then also only incorporating visual and auditory learners can be a bad thing as well, because the students that are kinesthetic or other types of learning, body smart, people smart, their learning style isn't being targeted. So I think that can be a bad aspect as well. Overall, Heiko was a wonderful school to teach at. This was about the size of the school I grew up at. So that was kind of helpful to see the differences in those schools. Also, the classroom I was in, I think, allowed me to see both very good teaching instruction, but also some bad aspects as well. And I think that's common to have both the good and the bad in a classroom. But it allowed me to see things I want to implement and things I definitely don't want to implement, and aspects of teaching that are often overlooked or the teacher doesn't even realize that she's doing in the classroom. Also, every opportunity working in the classroom helps to make me a better teacher. So this experience made me a better future teacher, because if I was not able to be into this classroom, I wouldn't know things about classroom management and what works best and what didn't work for these students, and just how you do have to change your classroom management techniques. And then I also learned that first grade is not my dream grade after all. During this grade, you still have to tie their shoes and aspects like that. And I think that my dream grade would probably be third grade. So just getting to see the different grade levels and all of the aspects that come with that specific grade was interesting. They had to do a lot of phonics instruction still, so learning how to read was a big aspect of this grade. And then also differentiation is important for students and the teacher. I saw students that were learning well with one way and not with the other way. So I learned as a teacher that it's important to differentiate instruction. It may not be too easy and it may be overwhelming at times for the teacher, but it's important for the learners to be able to learn effectively. And overall, I had a wonderful time at Heiko, and I could say that I learned that teaching is a work of heart. It takes heart to be a teacher in a classroom and to care for students and to come every day with a positive attitude. And that was just my main takeaway from this field observation experience.